Hey, welcome to the stream, everybody. We're here on YouTube on the Levine Show for the debate. Hope you enjoy it. Like, share, subscribe.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a special Sunday edition. Apologies for the camera angle, but here we go. What happened here is my buddy Gov Corrupt, also known as Kevin, he reached out to me on X yesterday and he said, hey, I'd like to have a conversation with Greg Wycliffe if possible, because I want to chat with him about the future of Canada, what kind of system would work, because Greg is obviously a populist who's very adamant that this is a way to handle the repair of the system is by getting into the system and making changes, whereas Kev has an idea that the whole system needs to be destroyed right down to the ground. I'm not sure if there's going to be a rebuild or not, but he had some great ideas that he wanted to share with everybody. So thanks for joining us on a Sunday. Let's go ahead and bring in Kevin and Greg. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
How's it going? Thanks for having us, Jason. Thanks for organizing this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Greg. And Kev, yeah, great. Kev is the organizer, really. He just reached out to me and said, I want to have a chat with Greg. And I said, sure, I'll try. And Greg, you said yes. So here we go. Kev,
I don't know if I'm actually a populist. I think I used to be a populist, but anyway, we'll get into that.
We'll clarify all of that. That maybe you've changed, and this would be a good time to find that out. Mm-hmm. Kev, let's go ahead and introduce the topic, what you wanted to chat about, and let's get right into it.
Well, basically, I reached out because I guess of all that transpired over the, Greg was quite critical of what I had posted and whatnot. So I just wanted to, that was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So, clear the air, let, emotions subside, and then, approach the situation, logically. So, because I saw that, you haven't really interacted with any of my posts before or after, so I just wanted to see if you have like an understanding of where I was coming from and why I was putting that out there. First and foremost, that is the reason behind this, and second of all, we can get into maybe the politics of Canada and the different ideology between the PPC and why I don't align with the PPC. It's because mostly that I don't think it goes far enough. Those are the primary reasons. Like, number one, I know that the PPC wants to dismantle the monarchy. Like, I understand that, and I think that should be a primary objective. But it doesn't really touch base on the central bank, the Bank of Canada, and it doesn't really touch base on inalienable rights like firearms rights. Stand your ground rights when it comes to like something similar to the Second Amendment, before all of their what would you call it, infringements came about, started in the 60s and the 70s. So that's something that I truly believe in terms of property rights, firearms rights, freedom of speech rights. And I think we can all agree that none of which we really have in Canada.
Okay, cool. And add parental rights to that list as well. There's a bunch of property-related rights that would be added as well. Okay, great.
But a lot of it does stem from property rights, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. the right to your property, and considering Canada, 89% of the country is crown land. I mean, you don't even have mineral rights when you buy your land. You're basically leasing it from the state or from the government, or essentially the crown. So there are no property rights, and and if you don't have any property rights, then you're not really a free individual. You're a slave to the state.
All right, cool. So a post a few weeks ago, Greg, I guess he wants to address that, and it sounds like there's a lot of alignment here already. But go on.
Sure. Yeah. Let me just kind of share my opening statement on all of that. My goal today is to point people in the right direction and trying to help them to maybe not sort of get caught up in things that I don't really think are a solution. because a lot of what you're talking about, government corrupt, sounds a lot like the kind of sovereign citizen argument, and we're talking a lot about.
You could just call me Kevin.
Okay, Kevin. Yeah, a lot of this stuff sounds like sovereign citizen argument. It sounds like what Norman Traversy was trying to do several years ago. There's a lot of these sort of like solutions that people present that don't lead anywhere at all. And I'm kind of here to be more practical, encourage people to think more practically in terms of what we can actually do in the short term and also the long term to try and turn this country around. And I would like to, after I kind of complete my statement addressing sort of the protest that you were suggesting, I would like to go over kind of like our both different versions of like what our vision is for the future of how we could turn this country around, because I'm very curious what dismantling the entire system looks like. And I'm hoping that you could kind of go first with that because I have my own kind of take on that. But yeah, I mean, I saw a tweet of yours, I guess, going viral, and it was, "Hey guys, let's do another convoy. Let's protest the prorogation of Parliament," something along those lines. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and just to be clear, the only reason why I chose Convoy 2024 hashtag, it was specifically because if I would have chose prorogation 2024 or some random hashtag 2024, I knew it wouldn't have gotten traction. Like, I've tried to put hashtags out there for a very long time, so I used that hashtag specifically to try to get it to get traction, but I made it very clear that it was all about prorogation, protesting prorogation, and the reason why I felt that was something that we should be doing is because Justin Trudeau put out a post in 2011 specifically stating that he was protesting prorogation of the Harper government. So I said, okay, we already have, an established scenario where this own government or, our prime minister was out protesting prorogation. Why don't we use their own narrative against them? And that was my whole philosophy. That was my entire,
Sure.
game plan. But I know that at the end of the day, protesting and writing to members of parliament, it really doesn't do anything. But all I wanted was for people to at least get up off of their butts and do something. Because people have been saying, oh, you're there and you're posting and you're tweeting, but you're not really doing anything. What are you trying to do to organize something? So I said, okay, this is an opportunity where we have clear precedent in the past. Shutting down Parliament is kind of a big thing. Why don't we? So it was basically a call to action to do something.
Right.
That was the entire point behind it.
So the thrust of my main criticism of this Trucker Convoy 2.0 protesting Parliament, the prorogation of Parliament, was I said this is probably, you might as well be wearing a Conservative Party of Canada T-shirt at this demonstration, because it would just be kind of usurped or used by Pierre Poilievre of the Conservative Party of Canada. So, and wouldn't you know it, they're actually doing Poilievre just announced a rally, Canada First rally in Ottawa, like a few days from now. So I guess my question is, like, do you support Pierre Poilievre?
No, like, if you look through my posts, I'm very critical of him.
No, that's fine. That's fine. It was a yes or no question. So why, what did you think of that criticism that I had towards your convoy idea? Like, did you take that seriously, or?
Well, I understood where you were coming from, but like if you're a PPC, if you support the PPC, your main objective or your primary objective should be, and this is my thought process, you can correct me if I'm wrong,
Sure.
should be to try to get Pierre Poilievre in as fast as possible, because the sooner he can do it, the sooner he's going to renege or turn hard left or abandon his voting base like every single Conservative leader has done for since the dawn of time. Then it would be an opportunity for the PPC to come out and say, okay, the Conservatives abandoned you again. look at this as maybe a viable option. But now, because of the prorogation, what is likely going to happen is Mark Carney is going to be installed as prime minister, and then the media is going to turn the talking points to U.S. attacking Canada through economic war and whatnot, which is going to change the entire outcome of any election. And it could knock Pierre Poilievre down to a minority or even a coalition government that a liberal NDP government can come, and now you have another 4 years of Mark Carney or a combination of
Sure.
both, and then you have conservatives waiting another 4 years. And then you just push the entire timeline back that much longer.
Right. So then in this organization of a convoy, you kind of were hoping to push in Poilievre quicker. That was kind of like part of the goal then with the convoy, is it not?
Well, the goal would be to get rid of this government and whoever is next to take that spot, because that is the position. If it was maybe, Maxime Bernier that was leading the polls, then he would be the next benefit. But the goal would be to dissolve this government, not have it cling on to power and potentially win an election,
Right.
going into October or, 2026. And now you have this whole conservative movement still rallying behind Pierre Poilievre or whoever replaces him. And, they won't be able to see the failures that he's going to bring up until 3 or 4 years from now.
Can I ask a question here, Kev? What do you think would delay an election? Normal business as usual, or an emergency in Canada, economic or otherwise?
Yeah, like economic. We already saw Mark Carney come out and declare a state of crisis. I mean, he's a private citizen. He has about the same amount of power as I do, so he doesn't really have the authority to declare a crisis. But this is what we're going to be doing. And if you take a look at the recent CTV Nanos poll, I know it's propaganda news, but they're positioning Mark Carney way ahead of Pierre Poilievre as who is best suited to negotiate with Donald Trump on that specific question. Poilievre is still winning in the overall voting, but on that specific question, he's 42 points versus 21 points for the CPC. So that just tells you if the ballot question changes. And you can see how they're campaigning. Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, get rid of the carbon tax, get rid of the capital gains tax, and basically neutering all the CPC talking points. And you can already see that their support over the last week or two is starting to dive. So if that trend continues for the next, 3-6 months, and they see that, in the polls, they may not need to, delay an election. But if they feel that they need to get that much more time, an extra 6 months, an extra year, for sure, they can, declare a fake crisis and grant themselves more power.
Hey, Kevin, have you been following politics for a long time in Canada?
I have.
Yeah, because you sound very in tune with the polls and the changing, shifting trends between these major establishment parties. And I guess I find it very interesting because you don't, as Jason said at the beginning, don't you want to dissolve the whole system or something?
I do, but I understand that it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. It could take 20, 30, 40 years. Even Yuri Bezmenov said if we, start the clock right now, it would take, at least 2 or 3 generations to change back the tide to normalcy, to liberty and independence. So, it's not going to start. I'm not going to say tomorrow, we're going to wake up and they're, dismantle the system and, everything is going to be gone. And it's going to be, complete chaos because, that number one, it would be delusional thinking that would never happen. And so it does take a process, and unfortunately, there are a lot of people in Canada that see only 2 parties. They see red and they see blue. And so I feel that in order to speed up the process, we need to get Team Blue in as fast as possible, so they can, screw up, and like I said, and maybe if the voter at least has integrity and intellectual honesty with themselves, they can come to the foregone conclusion that okay, we are in a uniparty. Voting for conservative and liberal back and forth is not going to change anything. Maybe we need to look at different options.
Yeah. And I wanted to go back to some things you said about some things about this protest that you suggested, and kind of compare it to like a long-term solution versus a short-term solution. And I guess I thought it was funny that like we got to get rid of this blue-red dichotomy. We got to get the blue guys in quicker. And it's like, well, is that really like that looks like more like a short-term sort of action that doesn't really solve anything. But I guess I would like to kind of get you to explain what your vision looks like. Oh, actually, before that, actually, one quick question. In terms of trying to turn this country around, would you rather have, what do you think would be better? Having a conservative majority with no PPC seats, or a conservative majority with a couple PPC seats?
Well, first of all, I think majority governments are wrong because they're basically de facto dictators. So any majority government is wrong, and even if there are some PPC seats in a majority government, they don't really have any power. So a minority government would be the best suited, with parties from across the spectrum. So a few PPC, a few NDP, a few.
But if they're a minority government, they can't really get much done, right? Because they're constantly.
That's kind of the point, right? That whenever government gets things done, all it does is it brings more pain to the taxpayer, and it doesn't really solve anything.
What's your answer to my question though, of having a PPC seat or not having a PPC seat? What do you think would be better? Like which would you prefer?
Well, I would. Well, obviously, I would like to see the PPC represented because the PPC to me is like the NDP to the Liberals, right? The NDP has been dragging the Liberals to the left. So by getting PPC in there, it would move the Overton window more to the right. And the primary fault of the CPC is they capitulate to the mainstream media all the time. Right. They capitulate to the narrative.
So let's hear it then. Thank you for answering that question. Let's hear it, Kev. What does dissolving our current government political system look like? Whether it's like a long-term vision, middle-term goal, short-term goal, what do you think people can do to accomplish this?
Well, first of all, I guess I'll ask the question to you is what is the point of having a federal government to begin with? If you take a look at their three primary tasks, number one is to protect the rights and liberty of the people. Number two is to protect the border security of the country. And number three is to fund a military and protect them and create a military to protect from, foreign and domestic threats. If you take a look at those primary examples, and if you had to grade the government, on an A to an F minus on how they've done their job, what grade would you give them?
Yeah, probably not a good one. But that's like saying a house is supposed to have a roof. It's supposed to have plumbing. Just because you have a house with a leaky roof and bad plumbing doesn't mean that you reject houses. Doesn't mean you don't want to live in a house ever again. It's like, no, you just need a better house. You need to fix the roof. You need to fix the plumbing. So this idea of just because the plumbing or the roof doesn't work, just because the military or the border is not secure right now, doesn't mean we should just throw out the mechanisms that would otherwise actually run that stuff properly.
So my point of view would be to download the powers from the federal government to more local provincial municipal governments, because if you take a look at the two primary areas where governments spend the most money, they're in healthcare and in education. Both of those are provincial mandates already. So there's you can basically replace everything that the federal government does at the provincial level by transferring their powers downward. So basically,
even for the military and the border, though, Like we have
Yeah,
the
so
largest unprotected border. How does that make sense if you want to do
yeah,
it locally
so if
the
you
whole
take
way
a
across?
So if you take a look at, how the United States was founded, it was founded as, 50, or we're going to call it now 50 individual countries under one union, where each individual nation had its own, national guard, right? And the National Guard's primary goal was to protect the border of that nation within the union. So it would be very easy for, each province to create some sort of, national guard to protect, borders and and whatnot. And especially if you take a look at our military, right? It doesn't serve the people; it serves the crown. And they made that quite obvious during the COVID, where military operations, they were spying on people, they were using psychological operations on the Canadian people. So right off the bat, it tells you that the Canadian military is compromised and is not in the best interest of we the people. It's in the best interest of the crown and the state. So they should lose their right to even form a military and maybe look at another solution. So again, it's downloading the powers of the federal government, because let's be honest here. There is there's Ottawa, and then you take a look at people from St. John's to people from Victoria and everywhere in between. There's a lot of different viewpoints. There's a lot of different ideologies, and there people out west, they don't feel that they're well represented by Ottawa government. So why not take away the power of Ottawa altogether and bring it to more of a local government where the people feel that they have more power to affect change, instead of being ruled over by tyrants thousands of miles away.
Yeah. So I think I disagree with that. I think kind of dissolving the federal government would add more chaos, and it doesn't even speak to the actual corruption. It's like, could there not just be corrupt bureaucrats at the provincial level and the municipal level?
Well, of course.
We can find that. Yeah. So that doesn't solve that problem though, right? And I do want to take a step back here, because I kind of entertained your frame there for a second, but you will wave our wand and we'll download the power to the provincial government and the municipal government. This is what I'm talking about when it comes to being practical. I don't have a magic wand that does that. I don't think you do either. So once again, how long-term vision, middle-term vision, short-term vision, what does the actual solution look like in your mind to accomplish a seismic change like this?
But it's inevitable, right? When the federal government becomes bankrupt, and they can no longer borrow and borrow money that's printed out of thin air, when they can no longer pay their obligations, when the interest payments are higher than the taxes coming in, when they declare bankruptcy, that is inevitable. It's going to happen.
What's going to happen?
That the federal government will declare bankruptcy, and there will be no federal. Well, we don't know what happens after that. We haven't had a system where our federal government has declared bankruptcy, but that it's inevitable in a fiat-based monetary system, which is the system that we live in.
So we wait till that happens, and then what? We run to the local city hall to try and get a seat to get power. These are really important questions. Like if we're going to talk about the future of the country and how we're going to try and move forward and turn it around, you're saying wait till they go bankrupt. And then what? It'll be a cash grab. We're trying to grab seats in the parliament. Like what do you mean, man?
Well, my question is, I don't understand why people are so adamant in trying to maintain the power of the state.
Yeah, no, but I'm talking about solutions. We can talk all day about how the system could be better. I agree with you. The system could be better. We got to get rid of these corrupt people. They don't even serve the people. I totally agree with you. How are we going to do that?
Well, if you want the most effective way, whether it's going to likely or not, is you have to abolish the central bank. The central bank.
How
is the
are we
threat.
Going to abolish the central bank?
It's
how
education.
Does that happen? How
through education. And like I said, this isn't going to happen next week, next month, next year,
sure.
5 years from now. This is going to happen.
We got time. We got time to paint me a picture here of what educating people about abolishing the central bank. What does that look like? Like, is there a political organization involved? Is it going to be campaigning? Are you going to, lobby the government or what?
It's when the currency becomes worthless and it's destroyed through hyperinflation, and the fiat monetary system ceases to exist. That's when the central bank would be, basically be ridding of itself.
But Kevin, to be practical, and I think it's where Greg's trying to go with this, is what would that actually look like? And I could see if Canada even came close to that, it would be the government bringing central bank digital currency or some other solution to the table, international money or something along those lines.
They would try, like the Bank of International Settlements would try and come in and offer
the International Monetary Fund, the Global Bank, all like it would look like Greece before that would happen.
So the question is, how would that look like? Practical. What needs to happen? And what needs to happen is people have to need to be dealt much more pain. The number one.
But I don't see a protest saying more pain being successful. So I'm not sure how you can accelerate that. But a little bit more practical, just one second, a little bit more practical as you were on to something. Carney's coming in. There's a deal with Singh already about economic relief. They are pushing the levers of a trade war. They're not trying to pull back at all. They've already signaled they're not going to be complying with Trump within 30 days. So we're heading in that direction. And if Carney is selected, which it looks like, we could be seeing at some sort of type of UBI being put in place, which would accelerate the pain you're talking about, but not for most Canadians. Most Canadians are going to take that check and that money and just be ignorant with it. Just very few people know about what will happen like you do and Greg knows. But how do you get more people to understand it, Kev, I think is the question here.
Well, that's that's economic pain. They the pain has to be knock on their front door when they have to choose between paying the rent or buying groceries, and because their
I don't see that
UBI
happening. They're going to send checks before that happens. That's starting to happen. They're going to bail us out,
and that's going to destroy.
Or it'll happen, and the media will say it's because of the conservative racists that this is happening. Like they'll spin the narrative and they'll vilify some faction of society that benefits the ruling class.
They can say they can say whatever they want. But what it would do, it would destroy the purchasing power of the currency, and it would drive up living costs, right? That and the number one reason, the number one issue that has toppled governments more than any other issue is rising food prices. And when food prices rise above 40% of median income, the scenario or the situation to overthrow the state becomes more favorable than peacefully complying through slavery and tyranny. So that is what is the practical solution? Food prices have to go to about 40% of what people make for them to see that how much pain this is, for them to actually get up and violently revolt against the system.
I don't disagree, but what I'm trying to, I don't know about the violently revolt part, but what I don't.
But that's what history says happens.
Can you give an example? Sorry, can you give an example? Can you give an example? Because you're mentioning a toppling of government. Can you give an example of like a model of where this has happened and where you think it'll happen in Canada?
Well, it just happened recently in Sri Lanka, right? We saw that was maybe 6 months or a year ago. Arab Springs was another example. Again caused by rising food prices. Venezuela, Central America. Countries in the Middle East. It's a process that just repeats over and over throughout history.
So I want to get into what my solution.
It's not what I want. It's just understanding that is the cycle.
Right. So I'm kind of asking you like what your sort of vision is or what the goal should be, and I want to get to mine. But to summarize, yours are wait until things get worse. And maybe there's going to be a violent uprising. Like, is that your solution in a nutshell, or?
Well, I think you said wait for it to get worse, then we bankrupt, and then the system kind of resets to the provinces or
Yeah.
something along those lines. Kev, is that along the right lines?
Well, let's be honest. We can go out there and do things all we want, right? But until there is a national movement to actually affect change, nothing will happen. And what 3-4% of the population is really all you need to cause a violent change in the political structure of a country. And we don't even have that. I would love to get up and do something right now, but unfortunately, again, there's not enough people that have been dealt, that pain. And you'd think that, going through COVID, that would have been much higher of a number, but, everybody just kind of, went back to watching Netflix and whatever. So, again, it's not what I want. It's just, understanding what the natural progression of the system would be. It's a giant pendulum swinging back and forth between collectivism and individualism, and that pendulum could take 200-300 years to swing fully.
What makes you think, if there is this sort of collapse of sorts and this shift of power, what makes you think that the people who usurp the power next will have the best interests of the people in mind?
Well, that's a very good question, and history has also said that they won't, and then one tyrant is replaced with another tyrant. So
I thought we're talking about solutions here, Kevin. Sounds like a black pill cycle of just more decay and destruction, and then new tyrants move in.
The answer is to remoral. I guess the answer would be what can we do is to remoralize society. Society has been demoralized to such an extent that they're no longer able to access risk against themselves, against their family, against their community, against their own livelihoods, and it's a process that's taken decades to inflict on society, and it'll take decades to unravel on society. So what can we do right now? What is a call to action right now? Start focusing on what is it? Nuclear, building, stronger ties with families, stronger ties with, community, localized, start, learning, teaching, your kids things of value that may have, much more value in a new paradigm, like, working with your hands, electrician, plenty of trades, stuff like that, instead of the academic nonsense that has absolutely no value, in today's system. So I guess that would be, the call to action is more primarily focused on the education aspect, educating, people on, the dangers of the system, educating people on the dangers of complying with the system, educating people on, the dangers of our monetary system. And I believe that it is the monetary system that is the most dangerous to our freedoms and liberties. And if people really understood how dangerous it was, like Henry Ford said, there would be a revolution by tomorrow morning. But people don't understand these concepts, and it's because then they're allowed to get away with, everything that they get away with. And so I guess, a call to action, a practical solution is to become more localized and to try to focus on things that you can change, rather than focusing on things that you cannot change. And things you can change are things in your immediate area, which is primarily, your family, and how you spend your money, where you spend your money, your local connections. Like I live on a farm in Quebec, and building connections with local farmers and whatnot for dairy or meats, and try to get away from the corporatism. Try to get away from that type of style. I guess that would be the immediate call to action. Be prepared with crisis currencies. things that will hold value if something does happen, and if nothing happens, then you have a bunch of crisis currencies like alcohol, tobacco, firearms, ammunition, just the basics, coffee, just stuff like that. Be prepared for the worst, but hope for the best type of thing. So and again, to answer your question, call to action, what can we do right now? Educating people in your circle of influence on the dangers. And the hardest part about that is having your circle of influence actually listen to you, because I can get better success with random strangers listening to me than people in my immediate family. So again, I wish I had an all solution. Say, this is the map. This is how I see everything is going to happen, and I have a crystal ball and I can predict everything. But I don't. I just know that I don't like, the idea of a federal government oppressing its people. I don't like their high taxes. I don't like the fact that they treat us like, free range slaves on their tax farm. And I think that the system, especially if you take a look at, Canada, we should be the most prosperous people in the world. There's no reason for us to, even have to pay taxes. There's no reason for us to even be in debt, but we are. And the only reason for that is we've been sold out by governments for decades, for decades and decades.
All right, so I'm going to throw it now to Greg, because I heard Kevin's solution, which really isn't one. It's just be ready for the situation when it comes up. He didn't say toilet paper, but he said everything else other than toilet paper to be ready for. What is your opinion, Greg? Because I don't think, like what Kevin said a couple of times was, in history, this is how it always happens, but he provided 3 examples. And historically, what actually happens is the government does shift a bit and starts going back to the right, and then starts going back to the left, and starts going back to the right. And it does change over time, and we're seeing some dramatic changes with Trump, and that's with a nonviolent revolution. So what are your thoughts about what Kev said, and what are your plans there, Greg?
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing all that, Kevin. Thanks, Jason. There is a, I've been following politics, tumbling down the rabbit hole for some time now. And, people like to think that there's a solution outside of the system somehow. And I tell them, even if there was an apocalypse tomorrow, all technology fails, it's some sort of dystopian wasteland, there's still going to be a political nature to the world. There's going to be strong men. There's going to be strong men who usurp the resources and the weapons, and they're going to use those weapons and resources and start to build a network, start to create a, economy. All that's going to happen, and there's going to be people in charge. This is human nature. This is human nature.
I understand that. It's the tribalism aspect that goes back to caveman days. Like it's your tribe,
survival.
like part of your tribe.
Yeah. So let me give me some time to share all my thoughts here, because it's it's connecting to with some of what you said, which is when you're saying there's going to be this failure of the system, or that we're going to go bankrupt. Do you really think the people who are in power now would create this opportunity for other people to come and, hey, you know what, we're bankrupt now, someone else should take over? If anything, they are planning this, and they are planning the next step, and so just kind of waiting for that to happen is obviously foolish. And I also bring up this whole concept of the human nature of people, even in an apocalypse, to have there be some sort of hierarchy or structure. That's always at play here. That's always at play. So if you want to educate a lot of people about, the central bank, if you want to mobilize a lot of people to, focus on your own community and focus on localism, you need to engage in some degree of organization, and in some cases, some degree of politics. This is always at play. Organizing people and moving them in the same direction, getting them following the same leader, singing the same tune, thinking the same way. This is what politics is. Whether there's a structure or not, that is what is going to happen. And I think that, the manifestation of this convoy, people saying, hey, let's vote for Pierre, let's become part of America, it speaks to how desperate a lot of people are here in Canada, and they're defeated, and they don't see any easy solutions. So they come up with some of these kind of, I call them like Death Star solutions. Like, hey, we just got to go in there, shoot a missile into the Death Star, and the whole thing explodes.
That's right.
The best example of this was Norman Traversy in 2020. Norman Traversy created this PDF file and said, I'm going to arrest Justin Trudeau for being a pedophile or something. And all these people got on board. He raised, I think, over $100,000 or something. And then he got the PDF and he put it into the mail slot for the U.S. Embassy, and nothing happened. But it felt good. It felt good to believe in this story, this Norman Traversy story of like, hey, we're gonna arrest Trudeau. And sovereign citizens have the same sort of argument where they say, hey guys, we're actually a corporation. Oh my God, read this PDF file. We're gonna change everything. And even if all that was true, you need to get enough people on board to believe that, to implement that. And why I always try to dial in these conversations and bring it back down to reality is we have no political power right now. People who think like us have no political power right now. And in the worst cases, we don't even have any sort of institutional power. And I'm going to go segue into my solution of what this can look like in the long term. Spoiler alert, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of toil. It's a lot of building stuff from nothing. Ever since the convoy, I realized that just having activists isn't enough. It can work in a short-term sprint in an emergency situation when the government's really out of control. And in many respects, that's what the trucker convoy was. Activists kind of coming out of the woodwork because it was so insane what the government was doing. And that worked in the short term. But in terms of long-term change in the country, we don't just need activists. We need entrepreneurs. We need professionals. We need organizations. We need sophisticated political movements to grow our own networks of influence, sometimes more overtly connected to politics, other times not at all connected to politics. Maybe you're just like a hunting club. Maybe maybe you like to homestead. Building things like this, they don't have to be directly connected to politics, but they can still kind of cultivate our same belief system or what we want for the future of the country, right? There's a lot of different ways to influence change. And I bring this up to paint this picture of a network of professional, organized individuals, entrepreneurs, because our political enemies do this very effectively. Mm-hmm. You have the liberals pushing climate change policies, and then you have a whole slew of professional organizations backing them up, nonprofits, people in the corporate world pushing the same policies. They call it the managerial class. Right? And they're in power positions in the corporate world, in politics, and they work together to accomplish their ends. And this is not easy. This is not simple. And part of the solution is to have successful people who think like us in power positions or starting to grow our own organizations and political movements. It's going to be a long slog. Like you said, it could take generations. But it starts with that type of building. And people like to crap on the PPC, say they're not going to win. And that speaks to the very sad attitude that I said a lot of Canadians have, like they're a defeated child. We can't win. This game sucks. Let's just go for Polyev. Let's just do a convoy. Let's just become America. Let's just destroy the whole government. It's a defeated child type attitude.
I have a question for you quickly while we're on this topic. Why do you think a PPC can't win? Why do you think they say that? I have my suspicions as to why, but why do you think that is?
That's sort of a different topic, and we could get to that in a second. But I'm going to kind of speak to why supporting the PPC and engaging with the PPC is really important first, if you don't mind, because that is where I started. That is where I connected with like-minded people. I got a message the other day from this young guy on Twitter, and he's like, "Hey man, I'm worried about the country. I really like you. What do I think about what should I think about this? What should I do? How can I help?" And I told him, checking out your local PPC chapter is a pretty good start. You'll find like-minded people in regards to politics. Maybe you'll vibe with them, maybe you won't. I wouldn't even necessarily poo-poo the idea of checking out a local conservative party thing just to kind of get your feet wet and see what's going on. Unfortunately, though, I think if you have good intuition, you'll see that the CPC is this massive machine that you are a peon in and will have no influence over. Whereas if you go to a PPC event or start to join their organization, you'll see you have a lot of freedom actually to pull levers and to try stuff out, try to affect the messaging, try to, shake hands and say what you want, where you can't really speak freely when you're part of the Conservative Party. But the point is, like, the PPC, they represent a great starting point for people in Canada who do want to change something. And as I said, it was a starting point for me. I volunteered, I became a candidate. Now I'm working on a documentary, building a media company. This is why it's important to look at professional organizations. Maybe they're not perfect. Maybe they won't win, but there's still a starting point for people to get together and start organizing something. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be something, some other organization that's not the PPC, but that's how they met. I'm sure there's many such examples of this that have quite literally already been the case. But that's more or less my kind of opening statement or kind of summary of what the solution looks like. It looks like hard work. It looks like building. And I guess I'll close by saying I don't really think I'm a populist necessarily. For those who don't know, populism is this idea that it's the people against the ruling elite and the ruling class, and the people need to rise up. I think it's a useful framework. I think pretty well every single political party uses this framework. Justin Trudeau will say, hey, we got to stand up. We got to stand up against, the corrupt white system and help out diversity, that sort of thing. Like, there's a populist frame there. And of course, the Conservatives do a similar thing. But I think that why populism is a bit misguided is it kind of rejects the idea of having an elite, or it rejects the idea of having a powerful ruling class. When I think in reality, it might not even seem realistic for a lot of people right now, but we need our own ruling class who thinks like us, who is near the levers of power, who can make seismic changes to the country. And we're seeing a great example with Trump right now in the States, where, is he some kind of like farmer populist guy? No, he's a businessman. And he's making major moves, and thankfully he's at least started to do some deportations. You need the power of the federal government to do that. And I think deportations is going to be, it is super necessary given how many illegal people are here now, and especially soon when these visas expire. We need the power of the federal government to do that. Sure, they might all be corrupt right now, but if we slowly build these political organizations, get people who think like us, not necessarily in politics, but also in the corporate world, who can work together as a network, like our enemies do, then we can take back our institutions and reform Canada to its former glory.
And what I'm just going to tack on there before I throw it to Kevin is, I think there's another definition here, Greg, of populism, but more of a modern populism, where you're right. Historically, it was to replace the elite, get rid of the governing party from the people. But a more modern one is the understanding that we are in a society where there's going to be elite, and you kind of need them. You need them to have the jobs and have the big companies and the big factories. But where the people put accountability into the government and into the elite is where I think the modern populism movement is, where the people are demanding accountability to the people and also some input by the people, not every 4 years or every 5 years when there's election, but throughout representation. And that's where I think a modern populism movement is where we're trying to push that into the current system of accountability, of add accountability, genuine accountability. So I just wanted to throw that in there a little bit. And then Kevin, I'm throwing it back to you because your question was, why can't PPC get a seat? I think if you look at PPC like a carbon copy of any traditional party, you're looking at it wrong, because the PPC hasn't created.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying the stream, make sure you support the documentary I'm working on, givesendgo.com/savefreespeech. Thanks for watching.
Like the traditional parties do. PPC creates a platform for normal average people like myself and others to go ahead and put themselves forward as an option to the people. So it's more of a platform than it is a party. And when I say platform, I don't just necessarily mean what ideas are we aligning with. I quite literally mean like there's a microphone and you go up there and start speaking to people and putting your ideas out there. That's what's very different with the PPC. And Canada's not used to that yet. They're used to polished, professional, pandering politicians, right? That's what they're used to. So that when they see somebody who's not polished, he's not pandering, He's not professional all the time. Sometimes he uses words that are crass and stuff. They're not used to that yet. But what they will learn, hopefully, and hopefully it doesn't require what you're asking for, which is a lot of pain first. What they can learn is we're everyday people and we actually know what is needed because we live in these communities. And this is exactly what the House of Commons was designed for. Now, I'm going to throw it back to you, Kevin. I'm going to say this is where I'm coming from when the PPC had no seats. But why should we stay in a parliamentary system? And what about moving towards a republic versus tearing everything down? Just move it towards a republic with more representation from the people and take some steps.
I mean, that is, substantially better than the Westminster system that we live in now, where it's basically top down, right? So the government, Section 1 of the charter says they can suspend your rights, and we saw that over COVID. So a republic where the rights are bottom up of the people, and then they transfer a portion of it to a governing body to make decisions, much like how the United States was founded. That would be substantially better, and then enshrine property rights and firearms rights, to protect your property and your freedom of speech. I think those three are paramount. But I think that the main reason why PPC is having a hard time getting seats, it has nothing to do with the platform of the party. It has nothing to do with the leader, Maxime Bernier. Like, I've been following Maxime Bernier since about 2015, 2014, first on Facebook and then on here. So I was well aware of him as a Conservative MP. I've followed his career. And you talked about PPC bringing you into this area, or into this you talked about PPC being that area for you, Greg. For me, it was the Libertarian Party that was I really aligned myself around, and this was probably in, I guess it would have been like 20. I don't know when the election was, 2015 or something like that. Even before the PPC was started. But yeah, sorry to go off tangent here, but the problem is not with the PPC or the leader. The problem is that Canadians as a whole are too far to the left. There's too much socialist ideology, and that is the major problem. Even the Conservative Party of Canada is left of center, right? I lived in the United States for many years, and the CPC would align more closely with the Democratic Party than they would with the Republican Party. I mean, they're protecting socialist style dairy cartel, the supply management. They have no issue protecting socialized healthcare. These are socialized systems that Canadians have come to rely on and live by, but not understanding the true cost or the dangers of it, especially economically. So that is the goal, is to shift the Overton window back to the right. And I think that is something that people like me, because I'm just one guy. People like you, Greg, we're talking on here. We're trying to bring the conversation back to the right. And whether you agree with my my vision or not, I think we can come to the conclusion that we both want a better country and a better standard of living. However we approach it, that might be different. You have your style, I have my style, but I think that our end goal is pretty much aligned, in terms of of what we have to do, or what our what we would like to see, and that's to see more freedom, more liberty, less taxation, less oppression. And that is ultimately the goal.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but that's really simple, though, isn't it? Like, it's very simple to just say, hey, we want the same thing. We want a better quality of life. And I think the value in having conversations like this is to hash out what the best approach is, what the best method is, what is the best way to push the Overton window, for example. I really think that Maxime Bernier should be saying terms like, we need to stop the foreign invasion. We need mass deportations now. Like, these radical statements They're not even that radical, honestly. Deporting people
Not
would just be
anymore.
upholding the rule of law. But but more often, Jason, like more often. And people need to adopt this rhetoric en masse. That would be great. That's what happened with Trump with build a wall. You know, he didn't even say stop mass immigration. He said build a wall, which was this beautiful visual that really pushed the Overton window. And yeah, he got called racist for it, all that stuff. But that is really where the rubber meets the road. That's really where the progress is made when the media starts attacking you, when the Ottawa bubble, when the ruling class, because it's really all the same thing, the Ottawa bubble is represented by the mass media in this country. So anytime that the mass media is attacking you, that means the ruling class Ottawa bubble does not like you. So if you're not getting attacked by the media and getting called the worst types of names, then I don't know if you're actually making any progress here.
And it's not just those, even other issues like COVID. There was no COVID, there was no pandemic. Climate change is a transfer of power. Everything that it doesn't exist. It's an authoritarian power grab. COVID was the largest transfer of wealth from the people to the upper echelon of society. There was no pandemic. It was an economic crisis. These things are you have to be said, and I'm not too sure if you put these out, but I try to post these things on a regular, and of course I get a lot of backlash on them. But these false paradigms that people live in, and these crises that people have come to accept, don't really exist. But they only exist in the minds of authoritarians. So we constantly, again, stuff like very simple, like there's only two genders, and liberal, your liberalism is a mental disorder. Very simple things that is designed to kick the beehive, and create that conversation. But yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that point of view.
Could I jump back to something else actually that you said? Because I hear it a lot. It's, well, Canada is just a bunch of leftists, libtard socialists. And let's kind of interrogate that for a second. First of all, during COVID, we had majority liberal voters who were like, yeah, let's not let the unvaccinated into the restaurants. Let's not let them travel. Let's not let them on a plane or a train. Is that like a loving liberal thing? No, that's like a fascist. That's like an authoritarian thing. And the majority of the country, or at least a lot of people who voted for the Liberals, supported this. So this idea that they can't be like an aggressive, strong, like Canadians don't have it in them to be an aggressive strong man, that's totally not the case. We've already seen the ugly face of, whatever you want to call it, leftist authoritarianism. But the key word there is authoritarianism, a strong federal government that will impose aggressive measures. So that is there. And then secondly, there was a poll or a study done, I think it was published in the National Post recently, about immigration or mass deportations. And nearly half of the country, or half of the people who voted, support deportations.
64%.
64%. There you go. Thank you, Jason. So they're all 64% are these aggressive nationalists, white supremacist racists. Like this idea that the appetite to turn this country around or be a more stronger, masculine, aggressive, racist person, I totally reject that. I think it's there. I think you're just buying into the Ottawa bubble propaganda that tells us, no, we're all just a bunch of soft pussies, guys. None of us are actually strong. Where there's no lumberjacks here. There's no blue collar workers here. There's no men here. No hockey players here. We're all just, purple hair, thick brimmed glasses, anthropologists. And that's just not the case. Like the CBC is not Canada. The CBC is just a bias propaganda arm in Canada that unfortunately gets to kind of have this disproportionate representation of how the country feels.
Well, I was just going to add to that, Kev, just a second. I was just going to add to that. I think Greg's onto something, Kev, that you got to consider is 64% of Canadians want mass deportation, while 30% are immigrants. So that's almost all Canadians want it. And 21 million Canadians less took the last dose of the vax than the first dose. So I don't think this narrative that we are the minority, the fringe minority, or the unacceptable group
Well,
anymore is true. It never was.
we never were. And to your point, I don't know if I may have worded it wrong or whatnot, but I believe that more than half of this country are socialists, and half of them have strong authoritarian views. So at least 40% of this country. And keep in mind, it wasn't the government that was imposing all these rules and regulations. It was the people doing it to themselves, right? They felt empowered by subjugating their fellow man or whatnot. So yes.
Is that fair to say, though, that they felt empowered subjugating the other man, or did they feel empowered that they were doing what they thought was right?
I've come to the conclusion that people have no issue being subjugated as long as they get to subjugate others. So people that the stock, the person who stocked the shelves or the cashier that had virtually no power was suddenly being able to and has been shit on their entire lives, or at least in their job, now suddenly could be in a position of power by putting that out to somebody else, denying a customer and making them feel good about it because it was done to them by somebody else. So because they were subjugated by others, now they want to subjugate other people, and the state enabled that, and so they were empowered under the quest of the greater good. But we all know that how authoritarians work. So half, maybe 30%, 40% of the country have strong authoritarian views, and are leftist, socialists, fascio communists, because that's pretty much the system that we live in now. Part corporate run, part full government run, and somewhere in between. And that is the primary problem with Canada, is this fascio communist state that is a plague to society.
So yeah, I would challenge your numbers a bit there, Kev. I'm not going to ask you to prove it or anything like that at this stage, because it'd be difficult here.
It was just off the top of my head.
Yeah, but I'm going to challenge them, because from my experience of talking to people, most people are level-headed, common sense, are just very quiet and very scared, and they don't speak up. It's a small group who's very loud, who makes everybody else kind of wig and wag here. Like we saw this with the soccer team for the U.S. There was only one, maybe two people, that entire soccer team, that bullied the rest to make the entire soccer team take a knee for a bunch of things. And I think that's more representative of what we're seeing here. It's not 40%, in my opinion. It's actually a smaller group who's really controlling it, the Marxist group, that's really controlling people through cancellation and other techniques. Greg?
I was wondering if we could maybe switch the topic a bit. Like, Kevin, are you a card carrying, like a narco-capitalist?
Well, there's no real card-carrying anarcho-capitalism.
Would you be the first card-carrying one then?
Well, anarcho-capitalism is the absence of the state, right? That's the whole premise behind it. Right. There is no state, so you can't really be a card-carrying anarcho-capitalist. It's
just a phrase, guys. It's just a phrase. Yeah.
Non-card-carrying then, but would you align with?
But if you want to look at what my political philosophy or ideology would most closely align to, it would be more libertarianism. And the Libertarian Party in Canada has, ever since Tim Moan left, has been very disappointing, and even the Libertarian Party, ever since Ron Paul left, has been extremely disappointing. So that would be closest to my philosophy and point of view, is libertarian ideology.
I was thinking about, because I haven't gone into these debates very much with an anarcho-capitalist. I'm not really that familiar with the ins and outs of it, but libertarian, sure. And I guess I was thinking of COVID and all of these rules that came down upon us, not just in the government, but also in different businesses. And a lot of this came from the will of a corporation or of a industry that represents a group of very powerful corporations, which is called the big pharmaceutical industry. So as an anarcho-capitalist, or as somebody who is a libertarian, like, doesn't that make you a little bit uncomfortable knowing that the forces of a corporation or a group of corporations can compromise our politicians, compromise our media, even impose policies at different other corporations for employees across the board. Like,
well, that's fascism.
Yeah, but
Fascism
it comes from a corporate incentive. It comes from the free market. Like, it comes from, sure, corrupt people in suits who are massaging those in power. But this idea, even if the state, like, let's say there is no federal government, would it not almost even be easier for a corporation like Big Pharma to try to impose regulations to force us to take their product? Because that happened with the state existing. So if the state wasn't there, how would we be more protected? How would we be even more protected from that?
Well, first we have to understand what capitalism is, and because what you're describing is fascism, right? It's the merger of state and corporate powers, where big business and big government get into bed with each other and then dictate and mandate at will. So in true capitalism, there would be no, centralization of, there would be no big state, and there would be no individual or no corporation would have a monopoly on the issuing of a nation's currency, which is what was the primary drive behind this, right? Is that who was funding all of that? Who was funding the campaigns? Who was funneling money to Big Pharma? Where was that money coming from? And the primary source is the central bank. That's where everything came from. So it's the relationship between the central bank and the government, and then the government and the pharmaceutical corporations. So that is the main issue. And so corporatism and capitalism are two completely different things, right? Corporatism I see as fascism, and capitalism would be the absence of that relationship without the aid of a centralized bank being able to fund everything.
All right, I guess it's just hard to imagine a world that doesn't have a central bank and a a pharmaceutical industry. Like a lot of what you're saying is kind of like this huge hypothetical that we got to get rid of them, or if they weren't there, or if I had my way, it would be like this. And it's like, well, it's not that way. So I guess
the central bank has one goal, one primary objective, and that is to enslave humanity. That is all they've done through perpetual debt. So that should be the primary objective, is to get rid of the central bank. Is it likely going to happen? Who knows? Probably not in my lifetime. But a more a better scenario, or a more freedom based would be some sort of a competing currencies, where you don't have one a monopolization on the currency for a nation. You have people actually companies and whatnot, or smaller governments actually competing with individual currencies themselves, just like an Amazon gift card, or an iTunes card, or stuff like this, right? This would be a much better scenario. I don't think people really grasp how dangerous the central bank is, and and they just just kind of shrug it off, and they don't really understand that it is the primary cause of pretty much all of our problems. And so, yeah, that is obviously my goal, is to talk more about central banking.
Well, money is the root of all evil, right?
Yeah, well, it's not the money. It's not the root of all evil. I think it's the lust for money is the root of all evil.
Fair enough.
and that is the issue. I mean,
can we kind of try and chat a bit about what we can do, practical things, real things that we can do? We were talking about PPC a bit. I don't think the Monarch is something we can do in 2025. That could be a more long-term goal. But what about getting some seats for the PPC and maybe focusing on something like the balance of power? Because whoever has a minority government would have to work with the balance of power. And at 30 seats or 40 seats, that's something that's attainable. Greg, let's start with you on that one. Let's chat a bit about what can happen in Canada practically. May be lofty, but still practically, that we can do to change some things around here.
Yeah, people need to admit how bad things really are and start to scrap and start to fight for some sort of real solution. I agree with what Kevin said earlier, which is we need to shift the Overton window. I think that's the most important thing. I think a lot of Canadians are still kind of like sleepy and they are under the spell of the Trudeau Liberal government with, oh, can't be racist. That's the worst possible thing. We need to support people and movements that are disruptive, that are outside of the Ottawa bubble, like fundamentally. That needs to be the thing that people should focus on. The PPC is one of those options. A lot of people like to criticize it. It's not perfect. They don't have a constitution, blah, blah, blah. It is something that the Ottawa bubble does not like. Okay? It causes them pain. It shifts the Overton window. This is a lot of pros, guys. This is a lot of pros. And the cons are like, well, they're not going to win. Like, all this stuff. And it's like, I don't really understand like how that, how just sheepishly sitting on the couch and supporting Poilievre is going to do anything whatsoever. Finally, Poilievre is changing his messaging now.
Yep.
Changing his messaging now. If you think the PPC didn't exist and no one was complaining about Pierre Poilievre, do you think he would have even shifted his message? Maybe he might have, but it's like people like us who are further right, pushing the Overton window, challenging Poilievre, rightfully criticizing him. Like, this is what actually.
What did he change on?
He's abandoning this. It's the carbon tax election. He's abandoning that, and he's going to do something that's more aggressive. He's going to call it Canada First. I don't think it's really like a real Canada First. This guy.
That's only because Mark Carney stepped in and took the wind out of his sails.
That's kind of the point, though. He will change when needed. Deportation is another thing he changed on. He said no deportation of students, but now he's starting to talk about deportation of illegals only. Deportation, by definition, is somebody that needs to leave, so there should be no groups who should and shouldn't go. They all should go. And he's also shifted on the reaction to Trump and the trade. He went from dollar to dollar to let's take care of our border. And these are just a couple quick examples there, Kev. And I don't think we really have to hash whether or not Poilievre is a panderer. Of course he is, because he has to be. That's the way the system works right now. It's unfortunate, but it is the truth. And I think what Greg is saying, we need to be a lot more right of this. Now, one question I have for Kevin and Greg is, do you see the CPC itself slowly splitting here? Because the more left Pierre goes, the more he dresses up, the more he shifts his position, and the more that he's dragging down the CPC party itself. There's a group inside of the CPC that are right-leaning who can't stand this, and they're biting their tongues right now. So, Kev, the question for you, because you're the one that highlighted that CPC could be standing at a majority or even a minority government for them or for the Liberal Party if Carney wins. Do you see the CPC themselves splitting because they've gone so far left?
So that's interesting, because I put out a post yesterday and saying if the Conservatives lose another election to the Liberal Party, basically, Toronto Maple Leaf style, where they're up, 3-0 in the Stanley Cup Finals, and managed to blow the game and blow the series, that the CPC should just pack up and shut her down. It should be it should just be erased from existence, and then something should come in and fill that void. Who knows what that looks like? But I firmly believe if the CPC does lose in the next election, then that should be it for that. And how do you call yourself conservative and then put progressive in front of it? A progressive conservative is just like it's basically a socialist wearing a blue tie. That's what I see it as. So this whole idea of progressive conservatism, it needs to go, because again, it's just pandering to the left. You need somebody, the Reform Party, people talk about that a lot, but what they wanted to do, and Ralph Klein out in Alberta, what they were actually, they were much farther to the right than what Pierre Poilievre and the CPC is. And I can even make the argument that Jean Chrétien is probably similarly aligned. The Liberal Party of the 90s and the 2000s is probably similarly aligned to what the CPC is right now. That's how far to the left this whole party has shifted. So if they do lose another election, then they should just pack up and go and shut it down and let somebody else take over.
Greg?
Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking of like solutions, right? Like solutions of what we can do. And I was just looking at your Twitter. You got a pretty big platform, over 100,000 followers. Do you ever talk about immigration, mass immigration? Do you support deportations?
I don't support deportation, mass deportation.
You don't support enforcing the rule of law in Canada for people who are here illegally?
I think that is addressing the symptom and not the root cause.
Can we do both? Fix the rules and deport?
Again, I think deportation is more of an authoritarian stance, and I reject authoritarianism in all its forms, including right-wing authoritarianism using the force of the state to impose its will, whether or not that the state, because the state caused that problem to begin with. I believe that the major issue is the welfare state. If you eliminate, and again, you're going to say, how is that going to happen? What is that going to look like? Mm-hmm. I have no idea. But if you eliminate the welfare state, if you stop paying people, a per diem, if you stop paying people, to come out here and provide them with social services like, healthcare, education, rent, cell phone, food costs. If you eliminate all of that, then a mass majority of the people the mass deportations would happen on their own. And for the people that would stick around and cause a ruckus or try to increase rob you or whatnot, that's where property rights and firearms rights come into play. For people to be able to protect their lives and their property and their family with the use of force against any violent aggressor.
So if you think that property rights are so important and that it's your right to protect your property and your stuff, why shouldn't a nation have a border? Why shouldn't a nation kind of kick people out who are not supposed to be there? Well, it sounds like you don't support that. It sounds like you don't support the idea of like a nation at all, or you don't think that it's like a priority to, get people out of the country who are there illegally. Do you even believe in a nation, or is that not even something that you're into?
And one thing to add on there, Kevin, that kind of dovetails to that too, is authoritative is when you don't have the people support. 64% of people want deportation, so the people support this.
Yeah, but you're still using the force of the state to impose that, right? So
you would use the force of the state to stop the guy from killing you too. This is like you said in your opening, one of the three things of the government is to protect the citizens. So this rule of law and protecting them from people breaking it would be one of those.
Yeah. So you guys put a lot of emphasis on mass deportations, but it's very, very not very often do we hear about ending the welfare state, which is, I believe, the primary driver behind.
Well, they may be related, though, Kevin. This might be what we're trying to highlight to you. If we fix the deportation issue, we fix Canada, we balance our system a little bit better, we may have a lot less people that require these assistance that you don't want to supply anymore.
Yeah,
it's kind of all related. There isn't no one solution here.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to agree on this particular point.
Well, what about the rule of law point? Just that point. If you don't like the law, it needs to be changed, and then less people will be deported if you change the law because the people's will was reflected. But what about just a rule of law portion of it? It's the law right now. Why shouldn't we enforce it?
I mean, if that's the route that society wants, if that's the route that the nation wants to take, I can, not support it, or I can support it. Those are my two options. But we also have to we also have to entertain the idea of, it was primarily driven by the free money that these people have been given. And if we don't end that, the free handouts, then you're basically putting a Band-Aid on a cancerous wound, right? It's not gonna fix the problem. It might fix it in the short term, but in the longer term, the conditions are still there for that to happen again. So you have to address the welfare state.
Well, I don't think Greg is saying keep open borders, but let's deport people. I think he's saying there's a lot of issues, but one of them is deport. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that you want to push the Overton window and you want to kind of invigorate Canadians to change their country, but it sounds like you don't really believe in the nation kind of even having its own independence and sovereignty, or like you don't really think that the Canadian people should be able to even protect themselves from outsiders who shouldn't be there. So if we don't have a sort of cohesive sense of unity, then how do we even impose things what we want for ourselves if we can't even differentiate of like who we are versus who they are, who i.e. people who should not be here?
Yeah, so you're asking the difference between nationalist ideology and an anarchist ideology. That is the root of that question. You're looking at from a nationalist point of view, and I look at it from an anarchist point of view, where imaginary lines on a map shouldn't exist. If you want my view,
So why should you have your own property then? It's just an imaginary line. That plot of your land? That's an imaginary line, bro. Why do you get a right to it? It's our community. It's the whole community. You should have Somalian refugees to come live with you. Who's to say it's yours? That's an imaginary line.
Yeah, and they can come in and try to take it, and I also have the right to defend myself from them trying to take it.
Okay, so and if you shot somebody, and then you had the law come down on you for that, and there would be like a trial. So you believe in the rule of law then?
So what you're trying to paint a picture of is mass chaos in a demoralized society.
I'm trying to figure out if you believe in a nation and if you believe in the rule of law. It's like really basic stuff. I don't know. It's very unclear whether you kind of sometimes believe in the law, other times it's an imaginary line. It changes.
Yeah, no. If you want to look at, my point of view, read Maury Rothbard, very detailed of what anarcho-capitalism is. Personally, the idea of the state itself is the problem. It is the cancer.
But is the state not some of the people who help enforce you have your land plot to help you satisfy that the system is in place, that yes, this is your plot of land. You go to the municipality, that is your land. Here's the piece of paper. You own it. That's not a private corporation who does that. That's a form of government that does that to ensure that you own that land and that is your property.
Yeah.
Do you think Walmart should do that? Do you think Amazon or Jeff Bezos should do that?
Those are all corporations, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to picture a scenario when we don't have capitalism and we never had capitalism. But the closer we can get to that capitalist point of view, the much more free and prosperous a nation would be. Whether you agree with that nation existing or not, you're more of a nationalist point of view and more of an anarchist point of view. So we have differences of opinions there. But the goal is embracing capitalism. The more you embrace capitalism, the more prosperity you will bring. And we've embraced socialism.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to get a very clear answer from my point of view.
That's clear. That part's clear because I'm trying to figure out, Kevin, what would this look like? Like, would it be a whole bunch of little plots where you have your own little castle again? And
in reality, it's a system that can never really exist, right? Because as Greg pointed out.
So wait, so then why even pontificate about it? Why even advocate for it if you yourself are admitting that it wouldn't even exist in reality? What? I don't get it.
Number one, because pure capitalism, it would be impossible to achieve, just like pure communism would be
Mhm.
impossible to achieve. But the closer we can get to that, the better it is going to be. And like you said, human nature, people will stick to their tribes, their groups, and as one power source is eliminated, a vacuum is created, and another power source rises up. We see that in governments all the way down to drug cartels, right? And street criminals. That hierarchy is prevalent throughout society. But that, I guess, that is my point of view, as in, I don't want to advocate for force from the use of force from the state onto others. I want to take as much
But
power
yeah, you do.
away.
If somebody trespasses onto your property, you do
That's not-
want the state to do something about that. You want the police force to do something about that, do you not?
Well, no, I would be much happier to defend myself and not have to rely on 911 that I call that would take 2 days to get to my house. Why would I want?
Okay.
Why would I want
Okay,
that?
so
But-
if a gang arrives with firepower,
Yeah,
you don't want it. It's just up to you to defend yourself.
absolutely, 100%.
Well, this won't
I don't-
last very long, because if you remember Chaz, that little experiment down in the United
But what you're thinking about is in a society with demoralized people, right?
With gangs actually, and there is gangs that do operate
with
and are
organized,
organized.
people, not
Unfortunately,
demoralized. Yeah, organized, Kevin, because they're going to be organized to come take your stuff.
have you seen the organized car thefts that are happening across the GTA, or at least maybe not organized, but like how systemic they are, how frequently they're happening?
And speaking of no borders and no rule of law, there's a group that does that right now. They're Organized Crime International. They don't care about borders or rule of law.
And Toronto doesn't
They
really
agree
have,
with you. They're anarchists, right? Like
They are.
it's kind of interesting how
Very anti-governmental.
The organized criminal mobs would actually agree with your idea of there being no borders.
Very
But
libertarian.
there's multiple levels of anarchy, right? There's anarcho-communism all the way to anarcho-capitalism. So not all, there's, a lot of people, when they hear anarchy, originally they go to, it's a communist ideology, but they're two completely different sides of the spectrum.
Let's change the frame a bit here. Do you think there's anything that the federal government does, or any level of government does, that is good?
No.
Nothing.
You don't think
Nothing
like
at all.
maintaining
Actually,
roads is a good thing?
No, they don't do a very good job of that, and free markets could probably do it much better. Yeah, the one thing that they are good at is limiting people's rights, taxing people, stealing from them, and putting and corruption, misery and death. Those are basically what the government is good at. Nothing really else. No, they're not good at building.
What if it
roads.
was a properly functioning government that was actually working properly? Like, for example, if getting into the States over the border, it's much tougher to get into the States, they say, the Border Patrol there. So you think that's useless to America? You don't think they should have that? Like border enforcement?
Again,
It's a super simple concept. Like, do you think there should be, a government entity that controls the border of who comes in and out of the country?
I think that the militarization of a border is wrong.
Okay, but you live in a society right now with organized crime, international terrorists, and some baddies. And that's with governments fighting them. So what would it look like if we didn't have that?
Governments are far worse and have killed far more people than any
I don't disagree with that.
Organized, criminal. Actually, the government took the model of the mafia and implemented it. That's their whole philosophy. Is they're basically organized criminals, where you have the CRA or the IRS in the United States, and the RCMP or the FBI, where you have the financial arm and the enforcement arm to gain funds and to to force their agenda. So the government is a mafia. The government are basically organized criminals, and they steal far more money than the mafia ever would.
Would you?
The average Canadian pays what, half, if not more, of their income to taxes. The mafia would probably only charge you 25%. You'd probably get a better deal with the mafia.
Well, wouldn't you, in your world, work with your neighbors in your community and develop some security on a local, regional level? Wouldn't that be something that you would develop, and that would make you the mafia of that land? No.
Well, that's local. That's basically what it is. Where it's not, you basically, it's a pay for service, right? So you have, private security, or you have, you want to drive on a road, you have to pay a toll, right? And that role is owned by something.
But this is what governments do by taxing people, right? The government taxes people to maintain services. So you're just explaining the government again, except it's like with different steps.
On a micro level.
But they don't really. If you take a look at the spending, a lot of our infrastructure hasn't really been paid for.
I get that, but how do we know that your system, once it gets bigger and more expansive, wouldn't also become corrupt?
Well, let me ask you: would you have elections?
It's basically the same system. Like you're describing a larger authoritative entity to charge people to use certain services.
It wouldn't be a larger authoritarian entity. It would be localized.
But it would have the authority over the roads, right?
It would be their property. It would be their property, right? And you can choose to drive it on or not, like the 407 highway, right? It's their property. You choose to pay for it. You pay for that toll.
You think all roads should be toll roads?
100%. Absolutely.
Do you have a common currency at least, or are you going to be translating currencies from every region?
Well, again, where you can go down to, if you take this idea of eliminating the federal government down to, maybe the provincial side, each province has its own resources, right? You have forestry in BC, you have oil in Alberta, you have gold in Ontario, lithium. You can create a currency that is based on, the resources of that nation. A resource-based currency, something that can't be created out of thin air, which is the driving problem in society today. That ability to create currency out of thin air has, driven the enslavement of humanity. So you have to stop that process if you really want, so we can talk about, we want to do, all of this, but, the primary threat to our livelihoods is that central banking, system. That's why I focus so much on it. And you can agree with me, and I can see your facial reactions, and I know that you don't agree with like probably 50% or more.
No, I think there's agreement. Like a lot of things you're saying make sense, but they're not practical. Like you can't reach them. Like how do we get there? And we're certainly not going to go back to the 1500s when it comes to trade, which is what you're describing. Now, if we're forced into that, bankruptcy, et cetera, well, then hopefully we can handle it. I think we can. But what Greg is trying to get at, what I'm trying to get at, is what would it look like then? Because everything you're describing eventually turns into government. Everything. Like you're even talking about provincial resources now. There would be government involved in that.
At the end of the day, every system is corrupt, will be corruptible because, humanity itself is corrupt.
That's correct.
So no matter how good of a system or how perfect of a system, it will be corrupted, eventually. So I guess.
What's more? Hold on. What's more realistic? Is it more realistic for actual nationalists to try to take over the existing systems, or actually good-hearted Canadians who can get and grab the levers of power and steer the existing systems in the right direction, properly enforce the border, refund the military? Do you think it's more realistic to take over our existing institutions by the correct people, or the bank going bankrupt, everything being dissolving, and then trying to start it from scratch? Like which do you think is more realistic?
Well, which would be more preferable would be to, scrap the system,
Okay,
because
can you
even
answer my question? Like, can you act? You know what I mean? Like, I'm framing my questions in a very specific way for a reason.
the problem with that is, we're still going to have, a massive amount of federal debt. We're still going to have a massive amount of provincial debt, and we haven't really
I'm
solved that
asking what's
problem.
realistic, though, man. I'm not here to have all these big hypothetical conversations of what could be this. Like, we're not making fantasy novels right now. We're talking about what is realistic, and in terms of how to improve the country and how we should think about improving the country. We have platforms. We want to give people ideas that they can actually grab hold of and use. I'm not here to have like a high-headed philosophical debate. What if human nature was different? What if all this was different? Let's not focus on the fantasy in the reality. What is more realistic? It's more realistic to try to take over our existing institutions and actually get them to work for us, or dissolving the existing institutions and trying to make something new.
Well, you already know how I'm going to answer that.
Well, he's asking for.
I actually don't, dude. I actually don't, because earlier you were saying that I don't believe in borders. Also, I should have my own private property, and so you're kind of all over the map here. I'm genuinely asking that. I don't know what your answer is going to be.
Yeah, I would much prefer tearing down the system than trying to save it. That would be my answer.
Okay. Wow. Right. So I really don't think that's realistic. I asked you at the beginning, what does that look like? And you gave me a series of answers about the Central Bank of Canada is corrupt and that needs to go bankrupt, and then people will starve, and then there'll be some transfer of power, which might not even be better. And then you said we need to educate people about the central bank, and then you said we need to educate people about localism and encourage them to like join their community or what have you, and remoralize people. And I agree with some of those things, but none of that really has to do with like an actual like visual, realistic steps of how to dissolve the existing institutions and rebuild new ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, everything that I've told you are my viewpoints and what I believe in. And you have your different viewpoints. You have things that you believe in that are obviously different than mine. And your plan of action is a lot different than my plan of action. And basically, I don't know if we're going to agree on this point or not, but I don't think that there's any value in trying to save the system that we have, just because of how really bad it is. And like you said, it's like your house. But what if the cost of rebuilding that house is 2 or 3 times more than just building a new house?
Well,
because
I think
that's how bad it is. That's how bad the house is.
I think there's a misunderstanding here. I don't think Greg is saying save the system. He's saying reclaim it and repair it, which is different. Save it implies we're not going to change much. But what Greg is saying is reclaim it and repair it, like basically change the whole thing without burning it down first. Isn't there a way to do that? Greg, am I wrong on that?
No, you're not wrong on that. And at this point, it's about, like, no offense, Kevin, but I feel like you represent the sort of sovereign citizen rabbit hole that people go down, where it's like, well, I just reject all of the systems and I just rejected like everything that's going on, and people just need to realize that it's all corrupt and then do nothing, I guess, like, and then educate people about the central bank and like, hey, you gotta know about the central bank. And it's like, if you look at realistically, in reality, what is destroying this country or affecting it most negatively, it's mass immigration. It's the radical demographic change. It's the fact that we don't even have a willingness to enforce deportations.
But what's driving all? But what's driving all of that?
There's a compounding effect when more and more people come in. It puts a strain on everything: job market, housing market, crime, everything.
But where is the money coming from to fund all of that? That's the problem.
Well, but Kevin, I think why there's a little frustration here now is you're probably right that the central banks of all these countries is where the levers are really stored.
But hold on. Sorry to cut you off. But even if we cut off the money that's going to all these social programs, and we still have people flowing in here. Would we not still have people flowing in here because you don't believe in borders?
Why would they come here? But why would they come here if there's no handouts?
Maybe they're getting deported from America.
Okay, then if they come here and they have no handouts and they don't deport themselves, then they can starve to death. That's their own.
Yeah,
that's their own choice.
or they would get desperate and there would be more crime and violence,
and
because there'd be a fight for resources.
And that's where you would have your right to defend yourself with the use of force.
Okay, well, we're kind of making some headway here. Like, why don't we deport everybody and change our immigration law so that people who are having handouts and only handouts are deportable, and go with something that you're talking about here, Kevin? Because
it's the give migrants, right? The people that come here to.
But do you want those give me people to leave? Do you want them to leave?
They need to go. And
I thought you don't support deportation.
So now we're on deport. Yeah, now we're back to deport.
My point of view is they need to come to the understanding that they will deport themselves by cutting off that funding.
Okay, well, you're giving people a lot of good credit there, but what about the ones that don't? Can they be deported by the government then?
What do you mean the ones that don't? That try to stick around and cause crime?
Well, the ones that decide not to take you up on your offer and self-deport and decide to stick around.
Okay, so how are they going to, maintain their standard of living?
Let's say they choose crime because that is accessible to them, because rule of law doesn't happen in Canada. Let's say they choose crime.
Okay, then you try to use force against me, then I have the right to use force against you, and people are a lot less ballsy when the consequences of their actions result in being shot in the face.
Okay, well, I think this is where your argument falls apart, though. I don't think Canadians want a society like that, where you have to quite literally fend for yourself and your life all the time. That doesn't sound like a society. That sounds like going backwards in time.
Yeah, but if you take a look at, I'm not too sure if you've lived in the United States or not, but I've lived in Florida, and an armed society is a polite society, and
sure, but they also have a government.
Yeah, but people are and in the Carolinas, and people are not going to come in and cause an issue. They don't know if you're concealed carrying. They don't know if you're going to pull out a weapon and shoot them. So we don't have that in Canada, right? We don't. People don't have the fear of the repercussion of the people. That I believe is a primary issue that even the PPC doesn't touch base on. The PPC is nowhere near as far to the right as it should be on self-defense, on castle law, on stand your ground laws. Pepper spray. What is that? I don't want pepper spray. I want a Colt 45. I want a Glock. I want a SIG to protect myself. I don't want pepper spray.
I'm confused though, Kevin. You're talking about all of these laws that you would like to have in Canada, but you say it's like authoritarian for like a government to enforce these laws, don't you? So like how, I don't understand that. And the other thing I want to ask is, like, let's say you have your property and you're going on vacation or something, and you hire security to protect your property, right? You hire security to protect your property. Is that a fair thing to do, but to use your money for?
Mm-hmm.
The point I'm getting at is we pay taxes to the government to enforce the law. And in some cases, it is the security of the country. So you would allow paying security to protect your property, but you don't think it's fair to pay taxes for the government to deport people to protect their property?
So when I was in the U.S., there were several communities that I went through, gated communities that had their own security. So you would live in these gated communities, you would pay a security fee, and you would have armed guards to protect that property, because the effectiveness of the state was very low, and very similar to where I am
so you
now.
Agree with the model, but you just don't think the governments are capable of doing that, and that so we shouldn't even try to do it.
Well, they've shown that they're not very capable.
But you're showing at this micro model that it works. Once again, why can't we just try to
and that's
repair
the
the institutions that we have?
And that's the whole premise of trying to get away from this, big, centralized power, the centralized
But dude,
authority.
you are getting excited about the power that this local community has over their land. And you're like, that's awesome. But then when you apply it to a large government or a large group of land of the country, you're like, oh no, that's bad. That's authoritarian. What?
So my local community isn't, I'm not going to go and try to like take over or annex my neighbor. And if I do try to annex my neighbor, I'm going to have to deal with the consequences of their actions, right? Again, I guess the whole purpose or the whole thought behind it is big centralized authorities are bad, and the more local you can get, the more you can shrink that down to a community level, to a local level, the more effective that is going to be. Whether you agree to pay taxes for a governing body to do it, or there are no taxes and you pay some sort of private security to do it for you. The question is who would be most effective at delivering such services. And governments really aren't effective at delivering services. That's quite clear.
Any business could also be ineffective at delivering services. And
the larger it becomes, the more ineffective it is.
All businesses can run into this problem, even small ones. But a question for you now, Kev: do you have wife, children?
I do not.
Okay, and the reason why I asked that question is because in your world, you can go ahead and shoot the guy who's coming after you, but if they take you out and your wife and children are not able to defend themselves the way you are, because you're gone now, who would you want to be there? Now, you don't have any, but when I'm thinking about your world, and if someone takes me out, well, I would want my community. I would want another group to take care of my family.
I guess the question is, why would somebody want to come in and take what you have?
I don't have to rationalize the criminal in the future that's trying to take from me. I can just tell you that they're coming, okay? And if they do come and they take me out, what about the rest of my family? Like, you don't have a family, so you're not so worried about that. But to a lot of us who do have that nuclear family, that would be a concern. I wouldn't be able to protect them if I'm gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just one example of why communities exist, and that's why neighbors take care of neighbors, because widows and children can't step up and take care of it the way you're describing. Greg, you don't have children yet, but do you, or I'm not sure if you do or not, but would you concur with that? Like, if you have children, you kind of look at this a little bit differently, because there's another generation you have to protect that's going to outlive you.
I mean, absolutely. We belong to a family. After the family, we belong to a community. After a community, we belong to perhaps a nation. And that has been dissolved by, for lack of a better term, or to simplify, globalism. And they want to dissolve the borders. They want to, erase this sort of connection that we have to our actual family. That's why they go after men and women and masculinity and femininity. And that's why they're going after religion, specifically Christianity, especially in Canada. And there's an atomization of people. You're just a hard worker. That's exactly what Pierre Poilievre is saying, which is supposed to be so different from Justin Trudeau saying a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. They're pushing the same atomization of Canadians, and it's antithetical to community. It's antithetical to even a family in some cases, and it's certainly antithetical to a nation. And that's why it's very concerning, Kevin, when you're like, I don't think there should be borders. And it's like, okay, so you don't think that we should belong to any nation? I think that we are just so, because of the reign of Trudeau and even years and years of propaganda before that, decades of propaganda before that, that's pretty well globalist and post-nationalist in nature. I think we've lost track of this idea that a nation can be a large cohesive family that's on the same page about things. It may not seem that way, largely for demographic change, multiculturalism, and mass immigration. That's been a huge part of it. But we are so far removed from that we just kind of see the government as a forever evil, forever bad, when in reality, again, you can talk about this anarchist system that's going to work. It's the same theory that the governments are. just because the government has been corrupted and there's bad personnel in various places doesn't mean that we can't usurp the power and glorify, reestablish, Canadian excellence in our institutions. And sorry, again, like, I know we have to wrap it up soon. You don't really have a solution. I asked you point blank, would you rather reclaim the institutions we have and actually get them serving the people, or start over somehow? And you said start over somehow, and it's super unclear what that would look like. And again, this is why I kind of want to encourage people, respectfully, Kevin, but it's like, I don't really understand the value you're providing people. You're saying, hey, government bad, government bad, government bad. Okay, then what? And then you're not really giving a solution other than like, let's just throw it all out. And, maybe if you're into homesteading, I could agree with that. I think that's a worthwhile hobby if you want to advocate for that. I wouldn't disagree with that. But I don't really understand the solution that you're providing people with kind of like what you're focusing on here. Sorry, one last thing. With the sort of, we need to dismantle the central bank, I really don't think that's going to be something, like I said, politics is about getting a lot of people on board and moving in the same direction. I don't think dismantling the central bank is going to be like the thing that people can get on board with. When you already have 64% of the country supporting deportations, which, as I said earlier, connects to so many different problems happening in Canada right now. I feel like that's a much easier thing that you could be using your platform to advocate for. But then again, you don't even agree with nations and borders. So like, I don't even know where to begin with that.
Yeah. So, your mention of, globalism and erasing borders, that's more on the, anarcho-communist side, erasing borders, flooding nations with mass immigration and, providing funding. That's open borders and a welfare state. I'm diabolically opposed to those two things. You can't have open borders and a welfare state. It's the quickest,
But you said that you don't want a state to enforce a border earlier. You said that you don't even want a state to even enforce the border or to keep people out because that's too authoritarian for you or something.
Yeah, well, my whole point of view is people would only come that would actually come to provide economic value, because there would be no handouts, there would be none of that.
Who's going to determine that other than the federal government of who's going to come and not come? This is why you need a federal government to do this stuff.
The individual. Yeah.
Quick question: are all nations anarchist at this time, or just Canada? Because I think that's going to change this dynamic a bit.
Yeah. Well, right now, going to our complete anarchist global economy again, it's never going to happen. And I think the thing here is I'm more arguing from an ideological point of view, and Greg is more arguing from a practical point of view, and those are the two issues here. But I guess at the end of the day, it's statism versus anarchism, and this idea of the state and this worshiping of the state, whatever party it is. I think that is people need to stop worshiping the state. But
I think that's the value you do add. Like Greg was saying, he wasn't sure what value you add, and I'm just going to put it out there, Greg, that the value Kevin adds is exposing this and being the critic and being the one that brings some attention to it. Like when he exposes Carney a year and a half ago and starts giving us concerns and saying, hey, look, we're in a cycle and these guys have selected this and we're to be in a rough shape and it's going to get tough. We need that. And we don't necessarily need somebody to bring solutions with it, although that would be a great package. You highlight the problem and the solution. And you're not one of those guys that create the problem and then bring in the solution, Marxist, but you highlight the problem and bring in the solution. That'd be a great package, but not everybody's wired that way. So maybe there is some value to Kevin highlighting these problems, but maybe not having a solution.
It's just the way that my brain works, and I'm good at pointing out the problems and identifying the trend. I think I came on your show, it was over 2 years ago, we start talking about Mark Carney. And I have
Carney, yeah.
text messages going back to like 2019 saying that this guy's going to be the next prime minister. And everybody was, downplaying me, saying it would never happen. Then, he's the next Ignatieff and yada, yada, yada. And, fast forward to today, and he's going to be prime minister in like, what, 2-3 weeks, March 8th, whatever it is. And so yeah, I'm good at identifying trends and patterns, and even back in 2019 I was talking about some sort of economic event that was going to push forward this authoritarian grab, and there's going to be a massive transfer of wealth from the people to the upper echelon of society. I didn't know that it was going to be like 6 months later from now, and I didn't know that it was going to be a health emergency, but I just saw it on the charts that I watched, and some of the indicators that I pay attention to, and it happened to play out. So I'm good at maybe identifying problems, but when it comes to maybe finding solutions, that's somebody else's job.
Yeah, so Greg, in software companies, I've done a few myself, you need all types of people. You need the graphic designers. They usually can't code at all, so you also need the engineers. And then you also need the testers. And ideally, the testers are not engineers or designers, because you don't want them thinking that way. You want them thinking outside of the box and really test things that they never thought of. And that's how you find the bugs and you break the system and then improve it and make it better. So we kind of need all three types: designers, engineers, and testers. Kev's clearly a tester. I don't think he's an engineer or a designer.
Interesting perspective. I wanted to go back to the statism versus anarchy thing, because I think you bring up a good point. And I think that there is the worshiping of the state is, I don't think that's really happening much
Not
on
now.
the right wing. Yeah.
No, not anymore.
Not even on the left. Like, very few are worshiping the state.
Yeah. And I think the problem is that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're doing this thing where we're saying, no, we don't need the state at all. The whole government sucks. These institutions have never been good. I mean, people don't say it that way, but that's kind of the implication. They've never been good. They've never been useful. Let's just throw them all out. And I think that's totally misguided. And it actually is sort of a weird it's an anti-elitism that's actually not good for us. I was saying earlier, the solution is that we need basically our own elites. We need elites who actually think like us, who are going to try to take our institutions and major corporations, or people who are in major corporations who have power, who have influence, who think like us. We need them to be in power positions. And I think that when we reject statism so much, it conjures this image of, what was that guy, Oliver Anthony? He was like, I'm working all day, selling my soul. And he's got another song like Ain't Got a Dollar. And it's like, yeah, like that's the working class man. And sure, those people are being totally shafted right now. But people like Oliver Anthony and this idea of like a local community saving the nation, that's not realistic. We already have skyscrapers. We already have these sophisticated systems of power and control in the government. We don't need Oliver Anthony to show up with his banjo to save the day. No, we need people in suits. We need professional organizations who are very intelligent, who have been to university, who can get into these systems and steer them in the right direction. It's going to take a long time. But this idea that the state just sucks, the state has been infiltrated by traitors or corrupt people. That doesn't mean, again, back to my example of the house, just because it's got a leaky roof and the plumbing doesn't work, doesn't mean we should give up houses or even give up on the house itself. It means we need to get a plumber. We need to get a roofer. Best damn roofer, by the way. Shouts out to Mr. Bigger. But, it's going to take time to repair this. But this idea
But what if the house is on fire? It's literally burning to the ground.
Well, it's not a leaking house anymore. It's a different problem, and you address it differently. We only have another minute here, gentlemen.
But just a quick thing. One of the major things, you talked about, building this network of, entrepreneurs and whatnot. And I talked a lot about education, right? That is where I feel is an important aspect. So I think that we have to target, public education. The primary objective of public education is to ideologically subvert the youth. So I think that we need to get government out of the classroom. And I think we can all at least agree on that. And if we can stop the government from inflicting its playbook on the youth, and start remoralizing them with traditional values, right-leaning views, and more of a to remoralize them, then you can start talking about maybe 10, 15, or 20 years from now, where that would really start to gain traction. But I think that again, you want to go after the entrepreneurs. I want to focus on the education aspect and stop the ideological subversion of the youth.
Okay, so Roger, we got to.
Sorry, real quick though, Kevin, but how would you do that? How do you just influence the educational system? The answer is create an organization. The answer is have some sort of professional organization, website, whatever the group is. Maybe it's part of an entrepreneur. Maybe it's part of a business where people can actually fund you to create propaganda videos or educational videos to create something to have that impact. And this is my whole point. We can talk about good ideas and good kind of fronts of where we can push our ideas in different parts of the existing system, but we need to have professional organizations and people willing to show up and do the professional white collar work.
So that's my next question. The last question to you, Kevin. Are you going to put on a tie and get to work and get into the system, or you want to continue highlighting from the outside? We lost you. It sounds like we're losing him. Okay. We can't hear. Sorry, Kevin. That was a good episode. Greg, I think that's our cue. Thank you very much, both of you, for hanging out with me this afternoon and having a great chat. I think we all learned something here, but I don't think there is a system that ever rebuilt. It's rubber banding, I think. Sorry, Kevin. But I don't think there's ever been a system that's rebuilt. You've always taken it and repaired it. All of them have been that way. Greg, do you want to have a final comment before we go? And sorry, Kev, we can't hear you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We got to look at what's practical. We got to look at shifting the Overton window. And right now that is talking about demographics. It's talking about mass deportations. This also represents the liberal ideology or the Trudeau ideology of like being racist is the worst thing ever. They implemented that for a reason. If we actually want to end the woke, we need to attack the core of that, which is political correctness. Okay, there is rampant crime happening across the country, and it is not being enforced. There is a crazy demographic change going on that is changing the face and cultural identity of Canada, and no one's talking about it, and you get racist for talking about it. We need to push against that first and foremost, because that is going to mobilize Canadians and help them get in the right mindset of like, maybe being Canadian is a distinct thing. Maybe we are a distinct nation. Maybe we have our distinct interests. And once we kind of get people on that page, then we can start to say, hey, maybe we can start rebuilding our institutions or repairing them to actually work for us. But it starts with this mindset shift of thinking of ourselves as a nation and not just this economic zone of people who work at McDonald's, which is what this new, right-wing leaders are doing with Poilievre. It's a new version of post-nationalism where it's not diversity is our strength, it's the best and brightest is our strength. And being a Canadian has nothing to do with your cultural heritage or who came before you. It has to do being European and Christian. It has to do with being a hard worker.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Greg, a lot. And thank you very much for your time. And I think the answer to Kevin's question is it would be the municipal funded fire department that comes and puts out the fire at the house. And I also think that the Kevin Anarchist internet service kind of ran out on us. So he may want to have some improved competition with that internet service and get something better. Kev, I don't know if you're back or you can hear us. Kev, can you hear us? No. Can you talk? Nope. So that's it for Kevin. But thank you very much for everybody for hanging out with us on a Sunday. Just a last minute episode, and I had a lot of fun. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. You take care of each other and your family. These are the most important messages. You shake the hand of a neighbor or a stranger. And why do I keep reminding you about this? It's because I love you all very much, and God bless.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, I'm waiting for my woman to hit the cue, but I'll end it. Bye.
All right. Can you guys even see me? Oh, no. Can I even do this? Shoot. That sucks. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. That was the stream. This sucks you can't see me, eh? I don't think I can do this. Yeah. Thanks for watching. We will talk to you guys soon. That's the stream. Love you guys. If you want to support... if you like that and you want to support this, there's going to be a new preview for the documentary coming out soon. Obviously, I got to rebrand it. It still says Bill C-63. 63 is kind of irrelevant right now. But no, the documentary is coming. And if you want to donate to that, go to givesendgo.com/savefreespeech. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one. Love you so much. And W's in the chat if you think I won the debate. W's in the chat if you think Canada should have a border and should be a nation. But thanks for watching, guys. We're going to talk to you soon. Until next time. In the chat if you think I